Good evening, everyone. This is Melissa, dietitian at Capital Health. Thank you so much for joining in today. Today, I'll be presenting on the topic of nutrition for a healthy colon. And before I get started, I just would like to remind everybody to please mute your phones just so we don't get any background noise. So this is a really good topic for the month of March, seeing that March is Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. And so what better time to present this topic today. All right. So just to get started, I always like to add in some new data to report. And so per the American Cancer Society and 2022 data, a new release, colon cancer is the third most common cancer in both men and women. And based on some recent data, what we found from the years of 2014 to the year 2018, incident rates have decreased by about 2% each year in adults 50 and over, which is excellent. In the meantime, however, beginning in the mid-1990s, we have seen an increase by about 1.5% per year in the younger individuals. So we're kind of seeing this reverse pattern in those individuals aged younger than 50 years old. And so what better time to look at what are those modifiable risk factors? It is very confusing out there as there's many different sources of information, from commercials to the internet to even our friends and family.
Do I hit that?
So
You can.
it can become very confusing regarding what's the right
And click.
food to eat and what's the
Everybody's
that might cause more issues down the road.
Let me hit mute.
So for purposes of this lecture, I will be reviewing the modifiable risk factors, those risk factors in which we do have control over each and every day. Whereas the non-modifiable risk factors are those which include genetics and age, which we cannot change. Now, when it comes to those modifiable risk factors, what we have found is that more than half, 55% of colon cancer cases each year in the US are linked to those modifiable risk factors. And those modifiable risk factors include excess body weight, physical inactivity, long-term smoking, high consumption of red or processed meat, low calcium intake, heavy alcohol consumption, and very low intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and overall dietary fiber. So I think that statistic alone is very powerful, that we can prevent nearly above 50% of colon cancer cases simply by adjusting those modifiable risk factors. So the key is that we do have the power to change the statistics, especially in those younger generations. So going through each piece, excess body fat increases risk for colorectal cancer. So in research, what they found is that, being overweight or in the obese category increases levels of insulin and other related hormones that encourage the growth of a cancer. Excess fat also puts our body in a chronic or long-term state of inflammation, which can also create an environment favorable to cancer occurrence. So I don't think I really have to say much here. The obesity and overweight trends are gradually increasing in the United States. And this is data that was released from the National Center for Health Statistics in October of 2017. And so we see, starting in the bottom left-hand corner, 1999 to 2000, and then top line, blue line, that the obesity rate in the United States was 30.5% of US adults aged above 19 fell into this category. And then over the years, the obesity prevalence has gradually increased, almost by another 10% between the year 1999 and the year 2016. And then for the younger generation, the children aged 2 through 19, we see a similar trend from 13.9% of youth population being in the obese category to now 18.5%. And this is, again, data that was released in 2017. We are due for another bullet point here to see, how our obesity trends are in the United States. So what is contributing to this unintended weight gain, obesity rates, et cetera? I think, one thing is our diet culture here in the United States, increased access to processed foods, fast foods, eating on the go, perhaps even the expectation that eating breakfast or eating lunch is optional. And so when you do have time to eat, perhaps overeating, there's so many different contributing factors. One of the things to think about too when it comes to managing weight is physical activity. So physical activity decreases risk for colon cancer. What it does is it helps regulate some of our hormones, such as insulin, and helps reduce inflammation. So aim for a goal of at least 30 minutes a day. The American Institute of Cancer Research actually recommends 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. So 150 minutes is equitable to 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And so that's how we get that number. Moderate intensity physical activity could be just simply walking. If the weather is inclement, it could be going on the treadmill. It could be maybe something that you really enjoy, like dancing or swimming or gardening. If you are in good physical shape and you want to do maybe some more vigorous activity, let's say like bicycling at a high speed on a stationary bike, the recommendation from the American Institute is at least 75 minutes of vigorous activity each week if you're at that fitness level. But certainly just getting the heart rate up is an important step in this puzzle. Consult with your doctor before starting any new exercise program, of course. We all are in different fitness levels. Oftentimes I meet with patients who have different limitations to their physical abilities. For example, let's say arthritis in the joints. And so simply walking can be quite the task. So what sort of modifications can you make given your physical restrictions, such as a foot cycle that you can kind of sit down and get the blood circulating in the lower extremities. So there's some different options there depending on your physical limitations. Now, meat increases risk for colon cancer. So red meat contains something called heme iron, and it's really, really, really high in heme iron. And this heme iron has been linked to the kind of cellular damage that can increase risk for cancer, particularly colon cancer. The red meat also stimulates production of something called N-nitroso compounds, which are cancer promoters as well. So the recommendation from the American Institute of Cancer Research is to limit your red meat to no more than 18 ounces cooked per week. In this presentation, what I put in is a couple different pictures. So I just wanted to note that red meat includes beef, pork, and lamb. And a lot of times consumers aren't aware that pork is considered a red meat by nutrition definition. Red meat is meat derived from any animal with 4 legs. If it comes from an animal from 4 legs, it's considered a red meat by nutrition definition. It's higher in that heme iron, and it can produce more of those N-nitroso compounds. The confusion lies with the pork, because the National Pork Board has a marketing slogan that says pork, the other white meat, if anyone's familiar with that. And it is true that pork by culinary definition is considered a white meat, but by nutrition definition, again, considered a red meat. So does this mean no red meat at all? Certainly not. That 18 ounces per week is the maximum benchmark. So red meat in moderation is certainly okay, but there are certainly strategies that you can implement to lessen the chances of you overeating on the red meat. So limit your portion sizes to no more than 3 ounces. That would be a good start. A 3-ounce portion is equal to the size of a deck of cards. So if you're somebody, let's say, who's pushing that 18 ounces a week benchmark, perhaps look at your portion sizes, and additionally look for alternatives to red meat, and we'll get into that shortly. I like to kind of also give visuals. So a 1-inch meatball is equivalent to 1 ounce. And so 3 beef meatballs is equal to 3 ounces. Just for visual context, since when we see ounces, we think, oh, are we weighing our food now? So visual is super helpful. So these are some of the alternatives to red meat. Things like chicken, turkey, fish, seafood, eggs, whole soy foods like tofu and edamame, beans, lentils, chickpeas, nuts, seeds, quinoa, and reduced fat dairy such as yogurt. So thinking about having some days where your dietary source of protein in the evening, maybe you alternate and you rotate in some chicken or some fish, or maybe even a plant-based protein, so that less of those evenings you're having the red meat. Here are some pictures of some lean protein options in lieu of red meat, like salmon, ground turkey burger, or a plant-based dinner, such as one with beans. Cooking methods also do matter. So high-fat meat cooked at high temperatures increases risk for colon cancer. So when we think about that very high-fat burger that's put on the grill, the question is, okay, yes, it's high in fat, it's high in saturated fat, maybe not so good for heart health, but then you're taking that high-fat burger that is also a red meat and then putting it under high temperatures on the grill, and this produces something called heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, both of which are cancer promoters. And so thinking about if you're going to be grilling, what other alternatives can you use? So for example, you can use turkey burger, which is more lean, 97 to 99% lean. You can utilize grilled chicken instead of burger, or if you really like to have a burger on the grill, because it is, again, embedded in the US culture, perhaps look for the leaner ground beef varieties, such as ground beef that is 90% lean as opposed to 80% lean. And then these are some of the leaner cuts. So again, for beef, if you're going to do steak, maybe sirloin, chuck, or loin cuts, because these, again, are the lower fat meats. Pork chops or tenderloin cut, again, lower cut meat. Wild game also tends to be more lean. And so if you're going to use these high fat, these high temperature cooking methods for red meat, these are some better options. Processed meat is meat preserved by smoking, salting, curing, adding preservatives such as nitrates and nitrites. Processed meats includes things such as hot dogs, bacon, sausage, lunch meats. I could go on and on, scrapple, spam, pork roll. And so the reason why meats are processed because they increase shelf life, and it's very cheap to process meats. They also enhance flavor, giving us that salty profile that maybe we crave, and also adds moisture to our foods, giving more of that desirable mouthfeel. Processed meats, however, increase risk for colorectal cancer. They lead, again, to these carcinogenic chemical production of N-nitroso compounds and polyaromatic hydrocarbons that destroy the lining of the gut over time. The added salt content also promotes inflammation, which again is no good from a cancer protective standpoint. So interestingly enough, so the American Institute of Cancer Research did say that, red meat in moderation is fine as long as it's less than 18 ounces a week. That's what all the research shows. However, with processed meats, it is classified as a group 1 carcinogen. So meaning there's strong evidence to say that processed meats can cause cancer. The group 1 category is in the same category as tobacco smoking and asbestos. And so here's a little picture, if you will, just showing the different groups and what they mean. So again, group 1, we know causes cancer. And in that group is the processed meats like the salami, bacon, sausage, etc. Red meat is in group 2A in the probably causes cancer category, but the processed meats again is up there. So taking this recommendation, the American Institute of Cancer Research suggests that any amount of processed meat eaten regularly increases risk for colorectal cancer. Now, I underlined regularly because, somebody can take this presentation and go, I'm never eating processed meat again. And I'm not the one to crumble your dreams or anything like that or your desires. The occasional, let's say, hot dog at the baseball stadium is likely fine. It's when it becomes a regular habit where there really might be an issue or an uptick in your colorectal cancer risk. So how do you know if it's cured? So first thing is to look at the ingredient label. So you see right here, sodium nitrate, that's one of the preservatives. And then you see a ton of salt added to the product. Again, that's not good. So traditionally, again, bacon, sausage, anything that's cured, salty, has a long ingredient label for your meats is considered processed. Excess alcohol intake increases risk for colorectal cancer. Again, it damages, it can cause DNA damage, and it can also help potential cancer promoters or carcinogens to enter cells. There's actually been some data regarding cigarette smoking and alcohol and how they kind of can amplify your risk for cancer. So those two things together don't go well, and then alone also is not good. So the recommendation is to limit your alcohol or avoid altogether. So if you do drink alcohol, limit your consumption to no more than 2 drinks. And then for women, no more than 1 drink. And as far as frequency, like how often, okay, I know my serving is 1 drink, how often? Again, limit your alcohol intake based on what you're used to. So if you're somebody who is a more frequent drinker, then cutting down your alcohol to by 1 or 2 days a week is great. If you're somebody who has, let's say, 1 glass of wine a week, I wouldn't be too concerned. But if you're somebody who drinks multiple days a week in larger portions, then there's something that perhaps can be worked on. So this is a serving of alcohol: a can of beer, 12 ounces, 8 to 9 ounces of malt liquor, 5 ounces of table wine, or 1.5 ounces of spirits. That's a serving. So woman, 2 servings, men, 1 serving. I'm sorry, other way around, my apologies. Men, 2 serving, women, 1 serving. So now we kind of talked a lot about the foods to minimize or avoid. But what about those foods that are cancer protective? So we're going to shift gears here. Phytonutrients are naturally occurring plant chemicals. They are found only in plant-based foods. They lend to different plants' color, odor, and flavor, and they can influence the chemical processes inside our bodies in helpful ways. So phytonutrients decrease risk for colorectal cancer. And so this is why the American Institute of Cancer Research suggests following a diet that's mostly plant-based with inclusion of course, some lean proteins. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, whole soy foods. These are some examples of your plant-based foods. Foods containing fiber decrease risk for colorectal cancer. So they may improve your insulin sensitivity and reduce inflammation, and also gives potentially toxic waste less time to come in contact with your intestinal or colon cells. And so how do we get in more of these plant-based foods that are cancer protective? How do we get in more of these phytonutrients or phytochemicals that are cancer protective? So this is a picture of the ideal food plate. This is called the plate method. It's a depiction of how to arrange your food plate ideally. It replaced the My Pyramid from many, many years back. So striving to make half your plate fruits and vegetables, a quarter of your plate high fiber starches, and 25% of your plate lean proteins. So it's a visual depiction of what the ideal food plate would look like at some of your meal times. So I mentioned the word whole grain, and I know, many of us might not know what that means. So whole grains include barley, buckwheat, oats, like oatmeal, quinoa, which is a high protein whole grain starch. We also have brown rice, whole rye, spelt, and whole wheat or whole grain. Those are the words that would indicate that you're eating something that's whole grain. So for example, the way that I typically describe it is whole wheat bread is a whole grain, but honey wheat bread is not, unless the first ingredient on the nutrition label says whole wheat flour or whole grain something. Even for rye bread, regular rye bread is not whole grain, but if on the front of the label it says whole rye bread, and the first ingredient says whole rye, then it is a whole grain. So it can become certainly confusing. The whole grain has all three layers of the grain. So it has the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. And it's that bran, the outer layer of the grain, that is stripped away when a grain is processed. The bran is what has the majority of fiber in the grain. So we want that bran in there. We want, let's say, bran flakes or oatmeal or brown rice or whole wheat pasta, because those are the grains that aren't processed. And so here are some examples of the whole grains, like I just previously discussed. And so eating more of those whole foods that are minimally processed would be the most ideal. And here's some pictures. I hope everybody ate dinner. It's almost 6:30, so I hope everybody did. If not, your stomach might be growling, but what we have here is a chickpea salad, a black bean soup, a chili, and these are just some ways to practically, to basically apply these recommendations in your cooking and in your cuisines. Lentil salad, lentil soup, a quinoa side dish or quinoa salad, barley soup, barley salad, and then also some ideas to make your salads more colorful, because the color of different fruits and vegetables means that you're eating a wider variety of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. So adding in different colors to your salad of plant-based foods is also a great way to get in more nutrition, more whole nutrition. So also looking at different ways to prepare different vegetables, and it really depends on your lifestyle. So like roasting is pretty easy, right? You cut it up, you wash it, you add on some olive oil, salt in moderation, maybe some garlic powder, onion powder. You could roast asparagus, you can roast broccoli. Even looking at different cooking methods, some of my patients will use the air fryer more, which is perfectly fine, gives their fruits more of that crispy texture, gives their vegetables more of that crispy texture. Frozen vegetables are just as well. So, if you're really pressed for time, frozen green beans, frozen carrots, frozen broccoli is perfectly fine as a method to help get in your vegetables in at meal times. Sauteing your vegetables, another option. Cruciferous vegetables are really rich in a phytonutrient called sulforaphane. Again, really good for colon cancer prevention. So things like cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. And also thinking too, not all of our meals are a sit down dinner, right? So when you're eating throughout the day, you might not really even think to have a vegetable in the morning because maybe you're having eggs and toast, and maybe for lunch you're having a sandwich. The problem with that is you're not getting any vegetables in the morning and afternoon. And so getting in all of your vegetables in the evening can be pretty tough to do. So thinking about adding in some servings of vegetables in throughout the day, and how can you do that, or how can you apply that? Having a handful of raw of cherry tomatoes, or maybe having some carrot sticks paired with natural peanut butter or hummus, cutting up some red bell pepper. Doing some of these things in advance can also help too. If you're hungry, if you wait till you're hungry, more likely to go for some of the less healthy snacks. So kind of preparing for your day can also be of benefit. And here are some healthy pairings. Again, vegetables paired with hummus, also fruits. So a hand fruit like an orange or an apple, or maybe, just to make things a little interesting, making a fruit salad with, like, let's say kiwi, berries, because sometimes variety is the spice of life. Pairings, again, apples with peanut butter, celery with peanut butter, banana with peanut butter. Doesn't necessarily have to be peanut butter. If you have a nut allergy, then this isn't right for you. But again, another healthy pairing of a plant-based food and a little bit of lean protein. Greek yogurt and fruit, reduced fat cheeses, and then of course, healthy fats. Healthy fats are anti-inflammatory. They help decrease inflammation. So things like nuts, seeds, natural peanut butter, avocado, salmon, olive oil. These are all examples of healthy fats. So good for your cholesterol levels, but also good in decreasing inflammation. Alternatives to salt is also something worth mentioning, simply because, looking for that salt shaker. We know that extra salt in the diet can increase blood pressure. It can also increase inflammation. So looking for alternatives to salt can also be of benefit. Things like rosemary, tarragon, onion powder, garlic powder. I put a picture here of turmeric too. So using the spiced turmeric can also be of benefit. There has been some studies about the spiced turmeric having poor bioavailability, meaning it doesn't get absorbed as well in the colon. And so it has a prolonged anti-inflammatory effect in the colon, or antioxidant effect in the colon as well. So turmeric as the spice can be added into certain dishes like chilies. It can be added into on top of your eggs in the morning. So there's several different options there. I know a lot of my patients will put it into smoothies. So there's so many different options there. But I just wanted to make a statement about that. Fresh garlic in your cuisine is a great alternative to the salt shaker. Also taking a look at your beverages. So the American Institute of Cancer Research does say that sugar-sweetened beverages they suggest to minimize, primarily because sugar-sweetened beverages can feed into unintended weight gain. It's not that the sugar in and of itself feeds cancer. It's that all the added calories from sugar-sweetened beverages increases risk for unintended weight gain, and being overweight or obese increases your risk of cancer. Increases your risk of cancer. We're talking about colon cancer today, but being overweight or obese increases your risk for 12 different cancers. So as a blanket statement, some alternatives to sugar-sweetened beverages include things like water, and if you need a little flavor, you can add lemon, lime, oranges, any type of fruit, herbal teas. You can also do, now juice does provide some potassium and vitamin C. So a glass of, let's say, 100% orange juice would be okay. But watch out for your other sugar-sweetened beverages like lemonade, sugar sweetened iced teas, sports drinks, energy drinks, sweetened coffee drinks, as well as other juices in excess. Milk or milk alternative can lend to your diet added calcium. So almond milk is typically fortified with calcium. Cow's milk has calcium. And as I mentioned before, low dietary intake of calcium has also been linked to colorectal cancer. So calcium fortified orange juice, a glass a day, is one way to get in that extra calcium, but also milk and milk alternatives is another way to get in that calcium. So the American Institute of Cancer Research recommends against relying on supplements to protect against cancer. Common question, one thing about supplements on the market is they're not regulated by the FDA. And so it really leaves practitioners in the gray area regarding the quality of the supplements and what they're taking, because there's nobody looking at the quality of those supplements. Also, too, what they're finding is it's not just one particular attribute. And here I have broccoli shown. It's not one particular attribute that might be beneficial about eating the whole foods. It's the synergistic properties of eating the whole foods that is likely to have a more beneficial effect in protecting against cancer. So for example, broccoli, all right, it's really high in sulforaphane, which is a phytochemical, but it's also high in dietary fiber. And those two components alone might work better than just extracting one component out of that and putting it into a pill. Vitamin D may lower risk for colorectal cancer. So I always say, check with your PCP if you can get your vitamin D levels checked yearly, not just for bone health, but also for your immune function. And also if you're at high risk or if you have a genetic predisposition for increased risk for cancer or colorectal cancer, it's always good to know where you stand with that. Vitamin D rich foods include things like tuna and salmon, vitamin D fortified milk or milk alternatives, cheese, portobello mushrooms, and eggs. This is my last informative slide. So in the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that the risk for colorectal cancer or the occurrence or prevalence, of colorectal cancer is slowly increasing over the years for our younger population. And so that is quite concerning. While adults over 50 are seeing a decreased occurrence of colon cancer, the younger population is. And so there has been, numerous studies regarding why that is. There was a recent presentation done at a gastrointestinal symposium reviewing preliminary results on an ongoing study, and they're looking into the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome, so think of it this way. So the colon contains hundreds of thousands of strains of bacteria. And when you have an imbalance in that bacteria, you might have digestive issues, gas, bloating, bowel irregularities, etc. What you eat can change your gut microbiome over time. So what you're eating, your regular dietary patterns can affect your bacterial balance in your colon. And so in this presentation at the gastrointestinal symposium, they were looking at a specific bacterium called Fusobacterium nucleatum that they think might be a part of the reason why we're seeing this in the younger population. So why is the gut microbiome, why is it that in the younger population there's issues? So diet might be one of the reasons. Now this is a picture showing, this is a slide showing what prebiotics are. So prebiotics are natural non-digested food. They promote growth of healthful bacteria in the intestines. And prebiotics basically are food for probiotics. Probiotics are bacteria found in our intestines. So prebiotics is food for probiotics. You can find prebiotics in things like bananas, onions, leeks, soybeans, and whole grains. So if you're a younger adult and perhaps you're not eating eating some of these foods like whole grains, maybe you're doing more of the processed grains like white rice, white bread, maybe your fruit and vegetable intake is low, etc. This can affect the bacterial balance in your gut. Probiotics naturally, this is the bacteria, can be found in yogurt, kefir, aged cheeses with live cultures, miso soup, and sauerkraut. So while it's important to get in, maybe perhaps healthy bacteria like in your yogurt, it's also important to have the food for that bacteria, like the whole grains. And so the overall goal is to make your colon happy and to promote the health of your colon, minimize risks for colon cancer. And again, using those modifiable risk factors individually, there is potential to lower your personal risk. I thank you so much for having me today. And just some finishing comments. Don't be afraid to try something new. Be proactive, not reactive. Recognize your barriers to change. I think if I had a highlighter, I would highlight that one because we a lot of times have a lot of barriers, and strategizing a plan to overcome those barriers to establish a healthier eating patterns. Practice mindful eating, so being aware of when you're full, self-awareness of your portion sizes. Small changes do go a long way. And a quote from Jillian Michaels, transformation is a present activity, not a future event. So how we eat, what we eat is something that we're working on each and every day of our lives. It's not something that we're looking for an end goal. Once I achieve this body weight, or once I achieve this, I'm good, I can eat whatever I want. It's something that we experience every day and work on every day. I thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm going to pass over the microphone to our colorectal surgeon, Dr. Godshalk Ruggles. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to post it in the chat box.
Hello, I am Dr. Godshalk Ruggles, and I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you in a second. Melissa, you might have to unshare yours. Oh, I think I might be able to do that. Yes, I can. All right. So my talk is really to kind of complement everything that Melissa said, and to really just kind of give a brief overview of maybe some of the more medical questions relating to colon cancer, the risk factors, warning signs, and then just some of the screening options. And then at the end, we'll be able to answer questions that any of you might have. Disclosure, I'm on the Speakers Bureau for a company named Signatera that is involved in colon cancer surveillance for patients. And again, today's talk, just in summary, risk factors for colon cancer, warning signs and symptoms, and then what screening options are available. So just like Melissa was going over in her talk, not to reiterate, but I think the, knowing how prevalent colon cancer and rectal cancer are is really important because it's not something a lot of people talk about because it's embarrassing. It's a kind of icky part of the body. I don't think so, but so in terms of new cases, it is the third most common new cancer diagnosed in both men and women. And it is also the third highest cause of death from cancer in men and women. So, this is something that affects a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of you have neighbors, friends, family members who've been affected by colon or rectal cancer. So in general, like Melissa said, we have good news. The incidence of colon cancer is getting better, and we hope a lot of that is due to the screening that people are getting, the numbers of preventative screening colonoscopies being done annually are increasing every year, except for, then there's a pretty sharp demarcation. If you look at this graph, I know it's kind of busy, but the thing that I really focus on, you have all of these really nice curving slopes down at the top, and they're all kind of moving in the right direction, getting lower. So the rate of people diagnosed with colon cancer in that age group has been steadily decreasing over the last many decades until you hit 55. And that's really where the sharp demarcation happens. All of a sudden, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, we are seeing this uptick in younger patients being diagnosed with colon cancer. I have 30-year-old patients. I've had patients in their 20s. Because of this, they even changed the guidelines to when you should get your screening colonoscopy done, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But so what are the things that increase risk of colon cancer? Why do we think that the prevalence or incidence is increasing so much in the younger generations? Like Melissa mentioned, a lot of this is preventable risk factors. Diet high in animal fats, smoking, alcohol consumption, diabetes, obesity. And then, the other side of what increases your risk of colon cancer, that's going to be your personal history, family history. If you have a personal history of polyps, definitely want to be more diligent about getting those colonoscopies done when they're supposed to be done. Family history of colon cancer or even advanced polyps. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people just say, oh, I've never had anyone with cancer. But if your parent had a polyp that was large or considered high risk, then that also would qualify you as being in a high risk category for developing colon cancer during your lifetime. Other diseases, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and then obviously genetic syndromes. So if you get colon cancer, right, nobody wants that to happen. Hopefully it doesn't. But what are you going to notice? That's kind of the one question that most people ask me. So a couple things I want to touch on. Prognosis, so how things basically turn out with your cancer treatment, how long you live, how much treatment you have to go through, how long you live without any evidence of recurrent disease or development of metastatic disease, which is disease that's spread to other organs. All of that tends to be worse in symptomatic patients versus asymptomatic patients. Why is that? Because most patients are not symptomatic until their tumor has gotten to the point that it is causing problems, which if you have a very small tumor in your colon, you're really very unlikely that you're going to notice any changes or any difference. So once the tumor is to the point where you're seeing a change in your bowel habits or these things, that means the tumor is likely going to be more advanced, which just makes your prognosis worse. So worse. The most common presenting symptom of colon cancer is blood in the stool. So if you're seeing blood in your stool on a regular basis, a lot of people we will see come in and they say, oh, I've, had blood for the last year. I just figured it was my hemorrhoids. Do hemorrhoids bleed? Yes, they definitely do. But we never know if it's that or something else unless we're looking for something else. And so definitely if you're noticing blood or really dark stools all of a sudden, don't ignore these symptoms because it could be an indication that something is going on inside the colon. Also, if you start having a lower blood count, and that's never been an issue before. We see this a lot in our older patients. All of a sudden they become anemic, their blood count's dropping. A lot of times they'll just be put on an iron supplement. The first thing that should be done if someone's blood count suddenly takes a turn, down and is lower than it typically is, you should get a colonoscopy to look because colon cancers bleed. That's what they're known to do. And that's a very common reason that we see anemia develop in patients. Other symptoms that you may have, so constipation, if the tumor grows to the point where it's literally blocking your intestines and things being able to flow through, will cause people to, think that they are just getting constipated. Things just aren't coming out. Abdominal pain, if it's gotten to the point where it's causing a partial blockage or a blockage, or possibly if the tumor starts growing into organs around where it is, that definitely can be painful. Obstructive symptoms, as I mentioned, inability to have a bowel movement or pass gas. I'll also mention, it's not on here, but a change in just your bowel movements. I will have patients come in and they say, I have always been once a day, every morning, could set my watch by it. And now I'm going a couple times a day and it kind of looks like my stools are thinner than they used to be. That is a hallmark sign that there could be a tumor growing in kind of the left part of the colon. Weakness, weight loss, those, we can definitely see with any cancers. Weight loss is a big one. If you're having unexplained weight loss, I would definitely talk to your primary care doctor about it. And then anemia, like I mentioned, resulting from blood loss. If you have symptoms, you should see a doctor immediately. So, won't I know if I have it? And this is the thing that I think a lot of my patients get really disturbed by. They get their colonoscopy because their doctor's been hassling them and they are supposed to. And all of a sudden they're diagnosed with a colon cancer and they didn't have any change in bowel habits. They never noticed blood in their stool. Their appetite's been fine. They don't have any pain. And they say, Doc, how did I not know that this was growing in here? And what I say to them is 75% of patients, 75% of patients diagnosed with a colon cancer have no symptoms. So waiting until you notice a change is, likely not going to happen early on. So that's why we harp so much about getting your screening colonoscopies, because if we catch something early, the outcomes are so much better. So screening, and really my emphasis when I talk to my patients about screening, is knowledge versus prevention. What is your focus? What's important to you? Because certain screening tests give you knowledge. All screening tests give you knowledge. Do you test positive? Do you test negative? Some are better than others, and we'll kind of go through that. But only one screening test offers prevention and can prevent the development of colon cancer. So screening means looking for cancer or polyps when a patient doesn't have symptoms. Finding a colorectal cancer before symptoms develop dramatically improves the chance of survival, like I had mentioned. And then identifying and removing polyps before they become cancerous prevents the development of colorectal cancer. So the American College of Gastroenterology comes out with kind of a system to rank screening options. Colonoscopy is the best screening test there is. It's the most sensitive in terms of finding polyps and cancers. It also is the only one that can prevent you from developing colon cancer by removing those polyps. Typically, if you're average risk and you don't have polyps found on your colonoscopy, your schedule is going to be every 10 years. So it's not a huge inconvenience. If you do have polyps removed, even more reason why you should be getting it. And usually it's then going to go down to like an every 5 year schedule. The other test that qualifies as tier 1, that is the FIT test, fecal immunochemical test. This is a blood test basically for the stool. What you get is like this little kit envelope. You go to the bathroom, you take this little wand and you scoop some of the poop, and then you put it on the test kit and it tells you if it's positive or negative. This has a very good positivity rate. So if it tests positive, you pretty much know there's definitely something going on. You would have to then get a colonoscopy to find out exactly where and what it is. But it does miss some, high risk polyps. It definitely misses about 60% of them. And then it also does miss some cancers. It's only, its sensitivity is only about 70 to 80%. So you will have people who test normal, test negative, and they have something going on. So it's not perfect. Tier 2 tests are going to be CT colonography, which is kind of going to the wayside. You still have to do a bowel prep for it. So most patients, if they have to do a bowel prep, would just rather do the colonoscopy than the CT colonography. The only benefit to the colonography is there's no anesthetic for it. The FIT fecal DNA test, otherwise known as the Cologuard. Everybody talks about this. Typically recommended to be done every 3 years. And a little more sensitive than the FIT test, but we'll kind of talk about the downsides as well. And then flexible sigmoidoscopy is similar to a colonoscopy. It just looks at the left side of the colon, not the entire colon. So, I mean, my feeling is if you're going to have some form of colonoscopy, you should just go for the whole thing. So, as I mentioned here, colonoscopy, if it's looking good and you have it in 2015, you don't need to go back until 2025. FIT, while it's less invasive, only good for 1 year. For this truly to be a very good sensitive test, you need to do it annually. So it's not the kind of thing where you can do it once and say, oh, you know, I checked out, I'm fine, and never have to do it again. So who should get screening colonoscopies? There's a new age, 45. Everybody talks to me about the fact that they're not 50 yet, so they don't need to get their screening colonoscopies. And I kind of smile and shake my head and say, unfortunately, the recommendations were just changed in the last year to 45, not 50. So now everybody across the board, average risk, is recommended to get a screening colonoscopy starting at age 45, specifically because we're seeing that incidence in colon cancer go up in those younger ages. So is there ever a reason to be screened earlier than 45? Yes, there are definitely some things that would put you in that category. If you have relatives with colon cancer or advanced polyps, if it's a first-degree relative and it was found on them at a younger age, we would recommend starting colonoscopies at age 40 or 10 years prior to when they were found to have something. So if you had a family member who was diagnosed with colon cancer, your mom, your dad, brother, sister, at 50 years of age, then you would be recommended to get your colonoscopy at 40. If they were diagnosed at 40 years of age, you would be recommended to start colonoscopies at age 30. Second degree relatives, those are going to be aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins. If you have 2 of those, then that also would put you into a higher risk category. And then any symptoms, obviously, like we discussed. If you're confused, because I will be honest, the screening guidelines, if you really do a deep dive, can get a little convoluted and confusing. Just ask your doctor. Say, I think I might be high risk. I don't know. They'll be able to kind of walk you through it and figure out when the right age to start is. So as I mentioned, colonoscopy, prevention, and knowledge. So it removes polyps during the procedure, and polyps are precancerous lesions. So the way I describe polyps to my patients, because polyps doesn't really mean anything to most people, is I describe them as freckles on the inside of your colon. So if you had a freckle on your arm that had been there for a long time, and then all of a sudden that freckle started growing and it was getting big and nasty looking, you would go to a dermatologist or your primary care doctor and you'd say, this freckle needs to come off because it does not look right. And they'd do a little biopsy, remove it, probably in the office, and you'd go on your merry way. Unfortunately, you can't see inside your own colon. The only way to do that is to have one of us GI doctors or colorectal surgeons look. But that's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for these, you know, things that, honest to goodness, they start as little 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter cluster of abnormal cells, but if they're never removed, will grow and eventually turn into something bad. So this is a picture of a colonoscopy. It's a long, flexible tube, so it can kind of twist and turn and snake its way through your colon, as you see over here. During the colonoscopy, you are asleep, a conscious sedation with what we call propofol. It's what Michael Jackson used. It's very safe if it's done in a monitored setting. And the great thing about it is it's typically described as the best nap my patients have ever had. You don't feel pain. You're not aware of what's happening. So you're basically sleeping in this picture comfortably on your side while the doctor's standing behind you looking at a screen and just checking out your colon. So these are some pictures of colon polyps. Like you can see, this is normal colon. You've got all this nice, smooth, slick looking lining. And then here you have this little cluster of cells. I mean, we're not talking huge, but this, if left alone, will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then if you see this picture here on the right, it's an even bigger polyp, which is what we call pedunculated. So it's on a little stalk. It looks like a mushroom. Sessile polyp just means flat. It's not on a stalk. So we snare that polyp off, basically take a little cutting wire that just chops it off at the base and send it down to the pathologist so they can look at it under a microscope. So progression to colon cancer. This is how polyps, turn into something bad. So they start small, they get bigger, then they get dysplasia. Dysplasia is kind of the buzzword for gonna turn into cancer. If there's dysplasia, that means it's getting close to becoming something pretty bad. Still, these are benign. These are not cancerous yet. Once we get to a really big piece of dysplastic cells, dysplasia, that have then started growing into the other layers of the colon, that's when we've turned into a cancer. Initially, that cancer will just be in the polyp. So sometimes just removing the polyp is all you need, or possibly a small surgery. And then, if that continues to grow, eventually it turns into a big cancer and causes other problems. So risks of colonoscopy. Bleeding is a risk. Obviously, we're removing these polyps if we find any so that those areas can bleed. Infection is very rare. Perforation, putting a hole in the bowel. The bleeding and perforation are less than 1 in 1,000 patients. They are not very common, and God forbid if they happen, can definitely be dealt with. Incomplete procedure, there's always the chance your doc might not be able to finish the colonoscopy or missing a polyp. No test is absolutely perfect. There is always the chance that something small could be missed on the colonoscopy, but still it is a much better test for finding things than anything else. So conscious sedation is given during the procedure like we talked about. And with that just come the risks of anesthesia. So now I was going to talk about the prep. Wow, this prep is so delicious. I think I'll drink another, said no one ever. None of my patients have ever told me they liked the prep, but most have told me it was not as bad as they thought it was going to be. So what do you have to do exactly to get ready for the colonoscopy? You have to drink clear liquids the day before. So breakfast, you wake up, you have Jell-O, broth, lemonade, just no solid food, no milk in your coffee, no yogurt, nothing like that. In the evening, you start the prep. So I have patients who will go to work the day before and just drink their clear liquids all day. When they get home from work, they start taking the prep. Now, when we think of preps from, our grandparents telling us about them, they used to be these massive jugs. I think they were like 4 liters each of this disgusting stuff called Go Lightly. Go Lightly still exists, but there are many other preps available that are much easier to get down, I will say. So Go Lightly is really a thing of the past. These are just 3 examples of preps. This soup prep, or there's many others like it, but basically 2 small bottles that you just mix up with water. They taste kind of gross, I'll be honest, but you just kind of chug them down and then you have to drink water in between. The Sutab, which is a prep where basically you just take a lot of pills and drink a lot of water with it. And then Miralax, this is just a stool softener that you mix with whatever you want and you drink the whole bottle of it over the course of a night. But Miralax, you can make it taste however you want, which is nice. Sutab, it's just pills and a lot of water, which some people prefer. And then the Suprep, it's not a huge volume. So most people tolerate them fairly well. So other ways to screen for colon cancer. And again, I will reemphasize, do you want to know if you have colon cancer or do you want to prevent yourself from getting cancer? If all you want to do is know, then we have the FIT test versus the Cologuard. The FIT I described to you, take a little swab, take a little poop, put it on the test. Needs to be done every year. And about 70 to 80% of cancers are identified. So there is a chance that something could be missed. Cologuard is every 3 years. It's more likely to have a false positive. So I've definitely had a fair number of patients who have a positive Cologuard test. And then they get their colonoscopy and there's nothing there. But pretty good at identifying cancer. About 92% of cancers will be diagnosed with a Cologuard test. Not 100%, but 92%. These are unaffected by diet or meds. The Cologuard is a little more involved than just going to the bathroom and taking a swab. You have to collect your bowel movements for 24 hours in a bucket and then mail it to them. I do not envy the person whose job it is to receive the mail at the Cologuard facility, but everybody needs to do something for a living. So these tests are specific for colonic blood. And, you know, my feeling is any test is better than no test. So if a patient is adamant about not getting a colonoscopy, but they're willing to do this, then it's, you know, better than nothing for sure. So as I mentioned, Cologuard, 92% of colon cancers found, only 40 to 50% of advanced polyps. And that's really, that to me is a big deal. Because if you have an advanced polyp that's right at that cusp of turning into cancer, I want to know about it and remove it before it becomes cancer. But with Cologuard, you only have about a 50% chance that that's going to be identified on the tests. So again, I had mentioned this earlier, the CT colonography, it does require a prep, which is why most people don't want to do the colonoscopy in the first place. The one benefit to it is it does not require anesthesia. So if someone is really high risk for an anesthetic and they want to do the prep, then this would be a reasonable test. It's not used very commonly. You drink the prep and then you drink some special contrast and they do like a special scan. Basically, it's like a fancy CAT scan. So how do you prevent colon cancer? Just to recap, screening is the most effective way, 100%. Diet high in fruits and vegetables and whole grain, avoiding red and processed meats. This helps and cannot be minimized, but a lot of cancer is just kind of spontaneous bad luck. So I have a lot of patients who tell me, I don't have anyone in my family who's ever had colon cancer, so that's not really a big risk for me. 95% of patients diagnosed with colon cancer have no family history. So it definitely doesn't mean you're out of the woods. And I have a lot of patients who eat very healthy, take very good care of themselves, and still end up developing a colon cancer. So it's definitely the best thing you can do for yourself, but it is not going to completely protect you 100%. I mean, nothing will. Quitting smoking, decreasing alcohol intake, exercising, watching your weight, taking care of yourself, and staying on top of what your doctor's recommending you do. So that is my presentation. Hopefully it was informative. I know I tried to pack a lot into a short amount of time because I didn't want to keep you guys here all night, but I think at this point, I believe we're going to open it to questions and people can put things into the chat. I'm going to stop my share. if you have any questions that weren't addressed by the presentation. So I will hand it back to Maggie, I believe.
Yes, we have several questions in the chat box. If you want me to read them, or if you want to read them.
Sure.
I could start with the first one. The first question is regarding daily fiber intakes and how we can meet them. So just to address this question, a little statistic, adults in America only are getting a small fraction of the recommendation. So really we want to aim for at least for women younger than 50, 25 grams of fiber a day, and for under the age of 50, 38 grams for men. And then for older than 50, 21 grams for women and 30 grams for men daily. So, okay, that's a lot of different numbers, but thinking in your head, how can I get in, let's say, at least 20 grams of fiber, nice round number, and then work up from there. So how can you get in the extra fiber? Getting adequate fruits and vegetables, so incorporating fruits and vegetables into your meal and snack times. Also, looking at your grain consumption. Is it a processed grain like white rice, white bread? Because these foods aren't going to really contribute much dietary fiber. So looking for whole grain varieties like whole wheat bread, brown rice, oatmeal, for example. And then another source of dietary fiber includes beans, lentils, so incorporating this into your diet. Last but not least, nuts and seeds. So thinking about peanuts, almonds, pistachios, pecans, flaxseed, chia seed. These are all excellent ways to increase your dietary intake from food alone. The other question, again, was regarding nutrition. It reads, can you talk about how eating sweets affect colon cancer risk? Foods like pies, cakes, ice cream, refined sugars, chocolate, also coffee and tea. So this is a common question that my patients have. We think that the sugar directly feeds cancer, but the way that I describe it to my patients is everybody needs the basic building block of sugar, glucose, to survive. I would never recommend a diet that restricts carbohydrate, but looking to practice moderation with some of these higher sugar desserts is an important factor. And allowing yourself, I think a lot of times if you say, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat this, that you're almost setting yourself up for failure, that maybe you're going to binge and eat it at a later period of time. So as a lifestyle change, just eating these foods in moderation, looking at your portion sizes. So are they okay? Pies, cakes, ice cream, added sugar? My short and sweet answer is yes, but practice moderation. One of my colleagues says, maybe think about an 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're making wise, healthy nutrition choices for what you're putting in your body, whereas the other 20% allows for a little bit of discretion. As far as coffee and tea goes, again, added sugar in the diet, it also adds into some of those empty calories that can increase risk for unintended weight gain. And again, I said that being overweight or obese can increase your risk of 12 different cancers, right? So just watch out for your added sugars in these beverages. Herbal tea, coffee with creamer in it typically is fine, but if you're having multiple sugar sweetened beverages a day with a lot of added sugar, this is where we can run into an issue in the long run.
Melissa, there's one other question up here. Do all mushrooms provide vitamin D or only portobello? One other question specifically about nutrition, I should say.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So, this was a question that I think a patient brought up to me a couple of weeks ago, and I almost was sort of stumped. And I always get impressed by some of the questions that patients ask me. But mushrooms grow in all different types of environments, and it really depends on the sunlight, right? So naturally, we get vitamin D from the sun. So different types of mushrooms grow in different exposures to sunlight. So portobello is the number one mushroom that's the highest in vitamin D. You can find lower amounts in some other types of mushrooms, but it's the portobello that's the highest simply because it has the highest sun exposure. Good question.
All right. I'm going to start going through the questions I see that are more pertinent to me. One thing I wanted to mention, and one of the questions kind of speaks to this. So to schedule a colonoscopy, how do you do it? You're 50 or 45 and you say, all right, I need to get this done. So you don't need a referral typically. Most insurances will just start covering screening colonoscopies at age 45. Some are a little behind the times and haven't caught up to the 45 thing yet. So you always want to double check, but most are getting there. And you don't need, anything special. There's actually most hospitals, and Capital Health definitely has what we call a direct access colonoscopy program. So as long as you're healthy, don't have any major medical issues that might raise a red flag, you can just go through the direct access colonoscopy program. They'll take down your information and kind of get you in touch with one of the GI doctors here at Capital Health. You don't have to come in for an appointment. You just kind of do an intake with a nurse practitioner over the phone, and then they'll give you the prep instructions and everything. And you can get scheduled. So the one thing I don't know off the top of my head, which if Maggie or Diane might be able to look at while I'm talking so that we could give it out to people, is what the phone number for the direct access colonoscopy program is. Or how people can, I guess, most easily sign up through that. So I'll start answering the other questions, and then hopefully we'll get an answer on that at the end. So where or how do you get a fit test? A fit test has to be prescribed normally by your primary care physician. And can you use a fit test between the colonoscopies? That's a good question. I guess the big question for me would be, would your insurance cover it? Because technically, if you're getting a colonoscopy, by the guidelines, you don't need the fit test, although fit tests are really pretty affordable. So I'm sure some insurances would kind of throw a fit about it, but my guess is you could kind of sneak it through. But definitely, regardless, all of these things can just be talked to your primary care doctor about, and they can, easily get a script for you and get one of those for you. Usually it's sent to you directly from the company. There's a good tip on here that I wanted to share with everyone. Thank you, Denise. Drinking the prep. If you drink it through a straw, it bypasses the taste buds. And if you make it really cold, it also helps. And I've heard that from a lot of people. Not the drinking it through the straw per se, but the making it really freezing and then drinking it as quickly as possible. But there are ways to kind of get past the kind of yuckiness of the prep. And then, do any of my patients use ClenPick, which is, it's another one of the prescription preps. It's definitely one that I've had people use in the past. I've heard good things about it. Honestly, I really don't think, people always ask me, oh, does this one get me cleaner than the other one? They all work well. If there's one that doesn't work, people would stop using it. So ClenPick, Soup Prep, Prep-A-Pick, oh my gosh, they all have these crazy marketing names. But definitely that's one of the ones that works very well. And do the pills work as good as the liquid preps? It's kind of in the same vein. And my understanding is yes. I have not done the pills with my patients because honestly, if you read the instructions, you have to drink 96 ounces of water with the pills, which to me seems like a nauseating amount. And most of my patients do really well with the other preps, so it hasn't been an issue. But from what I've heard from other GI docs, they the pills work just as well and they haven't had any issues. So if you have IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome, at what point, if you have a change in stool, should you contact your doctor? That's a really good question. So I think part of it kind of depends with irritable bowel syndrome, you can tend to have a lot of irregularity. So if this is just kind of the normal fluctuation between diarrhea and constipation back and forth, that's, I wouldn't say anything to raise a red flag per se. But if you start to notice blood and that's not anything you've ever noticed before, I definitely would mention that to a physician. Or if you're noticing these changes are kind of becoming more and more pronounced, the way I say it is, if hemorrhoids flare up, they'll bleed, but at some point they're going to get better. So typically with hemorrhoidal bleeding, I had a flare for a couple of days, I had blood on the toilet paper, and then it went away. If this is a cancer that's bleeding, it's not going to get better. You may have a day or two where you don't notice it, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty consistently something that you're seeing, and that doesn't just go away on its own. So the kind of persistent symptoms would be the ones that would alarm me and make me want to talk to my doctor about them. In terms of colonoscopies, I do perform them. That was a question. Colorectal surgeons all perform colonoscopies, as do gastroenterologists. So either you can go to, either kind. We have a bunch of gastroenterologists here at Capitol Health. So getting an appointment with any of us should not be a difficult thing to do. And then there are some questions on here. Medicare guidelines for seniors 75 and older regarding colonoscopies, or colonoscopy should be done up until what age? So this is a really good question and something that I find frustrating at times. So if you read the guidelines, they're very vague, honestly, and typically they'll say colonoscopies do not need to be done after the age of 75, but the decision should be made by the physician and individualized for each patient. So the number 75 comes from the fact that the average life expectancy in the United States for men and women is, I think it's 76 for men, maybe 77 for women, but it's right around there. So if that's the case, what's the point of doing a colonoscopy and finding something that's on someone where their life expectancy is a year later? That being said, we all know very healthy 88-year-olds who live independently, shop on their own, drive around, go hang out with their friends, go out to dinner, spend time with family. And my feeling is, if you have a really healthy 88-year-old, why are you not doing a colonoscopy on that person? Because if they were found to have something, it would likely shorten their life expectancy, which at that age is now going to be another, 5 years plus. So I think the thing that a lot of people miss is the individualizing it for the patient. Just because you've had a history of cancer doesn't mean, if that's behind you and it's been managed and fine and you're doing well, you should still stay on top of your screening. And if you're, otherwise healthy and have longevity in your family and living independently without a lot of comorbidities, I think stopping at 75 is really kind of a misguided cutoff. So, because really when it comes down to it, colonoscopies, one, are very safe. Two, colon cancer is very easily managed if it's found early. So I have operated on, I think the oldest person was a 94-year-old. That's a guess off the top of my head. They were out of the hospital in 2 days and they did great. Honestly, 94-year-olds do awesome with surgery because they feel no pain because they've lived through everything in life and they're tougher than nails. But, my bias is find it, because if we find it early, we can get it out and it won't be an issue. Whereas if it's ignored, then, definitely can cause major problems down the road. So,
Dr. Ruggles, I just want to interrupt.
Sure.
We just have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. And I just want to remind everybody to complete the survey at the end.
Okay, so used the pills, didn't have an issue drinking all the water. Perfect. Thank you for telling me that. I will be less biased against them in the future. It's honestly, no patient has ever specifically asked. I think if a patient said, I only want to do the pills, I'd be fine doing the pills for the prep. Benefits of using the Cologuard for a test instead of a colonoscopy. I mean, there's only one benefit, and that's that you don't have to go under anesthesia. And I guess the personal inconvenience of not having to do a prep, that would be the benefit. But really, in terms of your health, I would say there's really not a benefit to using Cologuard instead of a colonoscopy. And then the main phone number to call for the direct access colonoscopy program at Capitol Health, everybody get your pens and paper, 609-303-4444. 609-303-4444. Just call and they'll take down your info. So easy. And then get you scheduled for a colonoscopy. It's really minimal work, and one of the best things you can do for you, because colon cancer is one of the few cancers that's preventable. So hopefully this was informative and beneficial, and thank you all for hearing us speak.